What is she doing with my children? Adrian Cole's voice dropped into a cold whisper as he stood frozen in the doorway, his pulse suddenly loud in his ears. No one answered. Because inside that room, something impossible was happening. Ethan, the boy who hadn't spoken more than a few words in weeks, was leaning quietly against a stranger's shoulder. And Lily, the little girl who used to cry at the sight of every new nanny, was holding that same woman's hand like she had known her forever. A maid. Grace Mitchell. Her voice floated softly through the air, singing a lullaby Adrian hadn't heard since the night his wife died. The room felt different, peaceful, warm, alive, and for the first time in months, his children looked safe. Adrian's expression darkened, because in that moment, one terrifying thought crossed his mind. How did a complete stranger become more important to his children than he was? Before we go on, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story might change the way you see people forever. What if the person everyone looked down on was the only one who truly understood them? Adrian Cole was a man who built his life on control. Every deal he signed, every company he acquired, every risk he took, calculated, precise, flawless. In the world of finance, his name carried weight. In boardrooms across New York, people listened when he spoke. And in his own home, nothing moved without his approval. At least, that was how it used to be. The Cole estate stood on a quiet stretch just outside Manhattan, surrounded by iron gates and perfectly trimmed hedges. From the outside, it looked like a dream. Glass walls, marble floors, chandeliers imported from Europe. Everything inside reflected wealth, order, and perfection. But behind those walls, something had been broken for a long time. Since the night his wife, Isabella, passed away, the house had grown silent in a way no amount of luxury could fix. Ethan and Lily had changed. Ethan, only 8 years old, had once been curious, talkative, always asking questions about everything he saw. Now, he barely spoke. His teachers sent emails about his silence. Therapists came and went. Nothing worked. Lily, just 6, had become fragile in a different way. She cried easily, flinched at sudden movements, and refused to stay alone in any room for more than a few minutes. Every new nanny lasted less than a week. They didn't trust anyone anymore, and Adrian didn't know how to reach them. He provided everything money could buy: the best doctors, the best schools, the best caregivers. But the one thing his children needed most, he had no idea how to give: time, warmth, understanding. So instead, he focused on what he knew best: control. That was why Victoria Hayes had stayed in his household for over a decade. Victoria was not just a house manager. She was the backbone of the estate, the one who ensured everything ran smoothly in Adrian's absence. In many ways, she had become the invisible force holding the household together after Isabella's death. Strict, efficient, unemotional. Exactly the kind of person Adrian trusted. She believed in structure, in discipline, in keeping boundaries clear, especially between staff and family. To her, a housemaid was a housemaid, nothing more. And then, Grace Mitchell arrived. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when she first stepped into the Cole estate, carrying a small, worn bag and wearing shoes that had clearly seen better days. Victoria noticed immediately: the posture, the hesitation, the way Grace looked around the house, not with admiration, but with quiet observation. "She's temporary," Victoria had told one of the other staff members under her breath. Don't get used to her. Grace kept her head down and followed instructions. Clean the kitchen. Organize the laundry. Stay out of sight. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She didn't ask questions. She didn't try to impress anyone. But she noticed things. She noticed how Ethan always left his food untouched, pushing it around the plate before walking away without a word. She noticed how Lily would sit near the staircase in the evenings, hugging her knees, waiting, as if expecting someone who never came. She noticed the silence, not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that filled every corner of the house. Grace didn't try to fix anything. She simply moved gently within it. One afternoon, while cleaning the kitchen, she found herself humming without thinking. It was an old melody, something her mother used to sing when times were hard. Soft, steady, comforting. She didn't realize anyone was listening, but Ethan was. He stood quietly by the doorway, watching her. Grace stopped the moment she noticed him. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Ethan didn't answer. He just looked at her for a few seconds longer, then turned and walked away. Grace thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. That night, as she passed by the living room, she saw Lily sitting alone on the couch, her small frame curled into itself. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. Grace hesitated. She knew the rules. Don't interfere. Don't get involved. But something about the little girl's expression made it impossible to walk away. "Hey," Grace said softly, keeping her distance. "Are you okay?" Lily didn't respond. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Grace took a slow breath. Then, without moving closer, she sat down on the far end of the couch. And after a moment, she began to hum. The same melody. Soft, gentle, familiar. Lily's shoulders tensed at first. Then slowly, they relaxed. A few minutes passed. No words, just the quiet sound of a song filling the empty space. Then, something small happened. Lily shifted. Just a little. But enough. Enough to move closer. Grace didn't react. She didn't reach out. Didn't speak. Didn't break the fragile moment. She simply kept humming. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Lily stopped crying. From the hallway, unseen by both of them, Victoria watched the entire scene. Her expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened, because in that moment, she understood something clearly. This girl was crossing a line, and lines in this house were not meant to be crossed. Upstairs, in his office miles away, Adrian Cole ended a late-night call, unaware that something had already begun to change inside his home. A connection he didn't approve, a bond he didn't understand, and a quiet shift that would soon challenge everything he believed about control, trust, and the people he thought he knew. But the real question was, what would happen when he finally saw it for himself? The next morning began like every other in the Cole estate. Quiet, controlled, and carefully structured. At exactly 7 o'clock, breakfast was served. Ethan sat at the long dining table, his posture straight but distant, eyes fixed on the plate in front of him. Scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit, prepared perfectly, untouched as always. Across from him, Lily stirred her cereal slowly, barely eating, glancing now and then toward the doorway, as if expecting something or someone. Victoria Hayes stood near the entrance, observing everything with sharp, practiced eyes. "Eat your breakfast," she said firmly. "Both of you." Ethan didn't respond. Lily lifted a spoon, then lowered it again. Victoria's expression tightened slightly. She was used to resistance, used to silence. But what she wasn't used to was change. And something had changed. She noticed it the moment Lily looked toward the hallway again. Waiting. That was new. "Focus on your food," Victoria added, her tone colder now. At that exact moment, Grace Mitchell walked past the doorway, carrying a basket of freshly folded laundry. She didn't look inside the dining room, didn't speak, didn't slow down. But Lily saw her, and for the first time that morning, the little girl smiled. It was small, brief, almost invisible, but it was there. Victoria saw it, and she didn't like it. After breakfast, the routine continued. Ethan retreated to his study room for online lessons. Lily was guided upstairs for reading time. The house returned to its usual rhythm, efficient, silent, emotionally distant. Grace continued her work without interruption. She cleaned the guest rooms, wiped down surfaces, organized shelves. Every movement was careful, precise. She followed every rule Victoria had given her. Stay professional, stay invisible, stay in your place. And she did. At least, on the surface. Late that afternoon, as sunlight filtered softly through the tall windows, Grace found herself assigned to clean the music room. It had been locked for months. Victoria handed her the key without explanation. "Do not touch anything unnecessarily," she warned. "Just dust and leave." Grace nodded. When she stepped inside, she immediately felt the difference. The air in the room was heavier, not neglected, but preserved. A grand piano stood near the center, covered with a thin layer of dust. Sheet music remained open, frozen in time, as if someone had simply stepped away and never returned. Grace moved slowly, respectfully. She wiped the edges of the piano, careful not to disturb anything important. Then her eyes fell on the sheet music. She recognized it instantly. A lullaby. Simple, emotional, familiar. Without thinking, her fingers hovered above the keys. She hesitated. She knew she shouldn't, but something about the silence in that room invited sound. Just one note, she thought. Just to hear it. She pressed a single key. The sound echoed softly. Clear, gentle, alive. Grace quickly pulled her hand back, her heart racing slightly. "I shouldn't. You know that song?" The voice startled her. She turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, still, quiet, watching. Grace stepped away from the piano immediately. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wasn't trying to." "You know it," Ethan repeated, his voice low but steady. Grace paused, then nodded. "Yes." Ethan walked slowly into the room. His eyes never left the piano. "My mom used to play it," he said. Grace felt something tighten in her chest. "I know," she replied gently. "It's a beautiful song." Ethan stopped a few steps away. "Everyone else plays it wrong," he added. Grace didn't respond right away. Instead, she carefully moved back toward the piano, but didn't sit. "Do you want me to try?" she asked softly. Ethan hesitated, then gave a small nod. Grace sat down slowly, her movements calm and deliberate. She placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The melody filled the room, soft at first, then deeper, richer, carrying emotion that couldn't be forced or faked. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Ethan stood there, completely still. For a moment, he looked like the boy he used to be, not closed off, not distant, just listening. Halfway through the song, another small figure appeared at the doorway. Lily. She didn't say anything. She simply walked in quietly and sat on the floor, hugging her knees, eyes fixed on Grace. The music continued. No one spoke. And in that room, something fragile began to rebuild itself. Trust. Not given. Earned. When the final note faded, silence returned. But it wasn't heavy anymore. It felt different. Ethan looked at Grace. "You didn't play it wrong," he said quietly. Grace smiled softly. "Neither did your mom," she replied. Lily shifted closer, resting her head gently against Grace's knee. Grace froze for a second, then relaxed. She didn't move away. She didn't reach out either. She just stayed, letting the moment exist. From the hallway, unseen once again, Victoria Hayes watched everything unfold. Her jaw tightened. This was no longer harmless. This was influence, connection, attachment, and that was exactly what she had been trying to prevent. She turned away without making a sound, already planning her next move. Upstairs, Ethan lingered in the music room long after Grace left. He stared at the piano. Then, slowly, he reached out and pressed a key. Just one. The sound echoed, and for the first time in months, he didn't pull his hand back right away, but the question remained. How long would this fragile connection last? Once Adrian Cole returned and saw what was happening inside his own home? By the end of that week, the shift inside the Cole estate was no longer subtle. It was undeniable. Not to the staff, not to Victoria Hayes, and certainly not to the children. Ethan began coming downstairs earlier than usual, no longer waiting to be called for breakfast. He still didn't say much, but he stayed longer at the table. Sometimes, he even took a few bites before pushing his plate away. For anyone else, it would have seemed insignificant. But in that house, it was everything. Lily changed even more. She no longer sat alone near the staircase at night. Instead, she lingered wherever Grace happened to be, quietly following her from room to room, never speaking much, but always close. Grace noticed, of course. How could she not? But she remained careful, measured. She never initiated contact, never crossed the invisible boundaries that had already been made painfully clear to her. If Lily sat nearby, Grace let her. If Ethan watched from a distance, she pretended not to notice. She didn't push. She didn't demand. And somehow, that was exactly what made the children trust her more. Victoria saw all of it. Every glance, every small step, every silent moment that spoke louder than words. And with each passing day, her concern grew sharper. This wasn't just a maid doing her job anymore. This was something else, something dangerous. One afternoon, as Grace finished organizing the library shelves, Victoria entered without knocking. "We need to talk," she said. Grace immediately set the books aside and stood up. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria closed the door behind her, her expression unreadable. "You've been here less than 2 weeks." she began, her tone calm but cold. And yet somehow, the children are attached to you. Grace lowered her eyes slightly. I'm just doing my job. Victoria let out a short, humorless breath. Don't insult my intelligence, she replied. I've been in this house long enough to recognize patterns. Grace didn't respond, because she knew anything she said could be twisted. You need to understand something, Victoria continued, stepping closer. This is not your place. I know that, Grace said quietly. Do you? Victoria tilted her head slightly. Because from what I've seen, you're behaving as if you belong here. Grace met her gaze for a brief moment. I don't, she said, and I'm not trying to. Victoria studied her face carefully, searching for something. Ambition, deception, weakness. But Grace's expression remained steady, sincere. That, more than anything, irritated her. You will limit your interaction with the children, Victoria said finally. Strictly to what is required. Grace hesitated, just for a second. They come to me, she said softly. Victoria's eyes hardened. And you will send them away. The room fell silent. Grace swallowed, her fingers tightening slightly at her sides. They're not doing anything wrong, she said. That's not your concern. Victoria's voice cut through the air like a blade. Your responsibility is to clean, not to comfort, not to connect, not to replace. Grace's breath caught at that last word. Replace. I'm not trying to replace anyone, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then prove it. The tension in the room thickened. Grace nodded slowly. I understand. Victoria turned toward the door, then paused. One more thing, she added without looking back. Mr. Cole will be returning soon. Grace felt her stomach tighten. And when he does, I suggest you remember exactly who you are in this house. With that, Victoria left. The door clicked shut behind her. Grace stood there for a long moment, unmoving. The words echoed in her mind. Limit your interaction. Send them away. Remember your place. She took a slow breath, then another, and forced herself to continue working, because she didn't have a choice. That evening, the house felt different again. Heavier, more controlled, as if something invisible had shifted. Lily approached Grace in the hallway, her small steps hesitant. Are you busy? She asked quietly. Grace knelt down slightly, keeping a careful distance. A little, she said gently, but I'll be done soon. Lily looked at her for a moment, then took a small step closer. Can you sing again tonight? The question was soft, hopeful, and it hurt more than Grace expected. She hesitated. Victoria's voice echoed in her head. Send them away. Grace forced a small smile. Maybe another time, she said. Lily's expression fell instantly. Oh. She nodded, looking down at her hands. Okay. Grace felt something twist painfully in her chest, but she didn't reach out, didn't change her answer, because now she understood the cost. Ethan stood at the end of the hallway, watching the exchange. His expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened slightly. He didn't say anything. He simply turned and walked away. That night, dinner was quieter than usual, even for that house. Lily barely touched her food. Ethan finished quickly and left without a word. Victoria remained composed, as always, and Grace stayed invisible, exactly as instructed. But something had broken. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. Later that night, as Grace passed by the living room, she heard a faint sound. Music, soft, unsteady. She followed it, carefully, and found Ethan sitting at the piano, his fingers pressing the keys slowly, hesitantly, trying to remember something he wasn't sure he could still feel. Grace stood in the doorway, watching. She didn't interrupt, didn't speak. She just stayed there, until Ethan stopped playing. He didn't turn around, but he knew she was there. "You said you understood," he said quietly. Grace's heart sank. "I do," she replied. "Then why did you lie?" The question hung in the air, heavy, sharp. Grace took a step forward. "I didn't lie," she said softly. "I just have to be careful." Ethan let out a quiet breath. "You're like the others now." Grace froze. "No," she said quickly. "I'm not." Ethan shook his head slightly. "They all leave," he murmured. "Or they stop caring." Grace stepped closer. "I'm still here." Ethan finally turned to look at her for a moment. He didn't look convinced. And that was worse than anything, because trust, once shaken, wasn't easy to rebuild. Upstairs, Victoria stood by the window, looking out into the dark night. Waiting. Calculating. Because she knew something Adrian Cole didn't. He was coming home earlier than expected. And when he did, everything that had been quietly building inside this house would be exposed. The question was, who would still be standing when that moment finally came? The distance Grace created did exactly what Victoria intended. It hurt. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in quiet, invisible ways that no one seemed to acknowledge, except the children. By the next morning, the small changes that had begun to bloom inside the Cole estate started to fade. Ethan returned to his old routine. He came down later than usual, sat at the table, and stared at his food without touching it. When Victoria reminded him to eat, he didn't argue. He simply pushed his plate away after a few minutes and left. Lily followed a similar pattern. She no longer lingered near Grace, no longer waited in the hallway. Instead, she stayed close to the staircase again, hugging her knees, retreating into the quiet shell she had built around herself. The house returned to its familiar silence, cold, ordered, empty. Grace noticed everything, every glance avoided, every step pulled back. Every moment she could have helped, but didn't. Because she was trying to follow the rules, because she was trying to keep her job, because she had responsibilities beyond this house. At home, her mother's condition had worsened. The medication costs had doubled in the past 2 weeks, and the hospital bills were beginning to stack up. Grace had spent the previous night reviewing numbers she could barely afford to think about. Rent, food, medicine. Her younger brother Jake needed tools for his mechanic apprenticeship, but she had already told him to wait. Again. "I'll figure something out," she had promised, but she wasn't sure how. So when Victoria's warning echoed in her mind, "Remember your place," it wasn't just about pride. It was survival. That afternoon, Grace was assigned to clean one of the storage rooms near the back of the estate. It was rarely used, filled with boxes, old furniture, and items that hadn't been touched in years. She worked quietly, dusting shelves, organizing what she could, until she came across a small wooden box. It was tucked away behind a stack of old files, almost hidden. Grace hesitated. She knew she wasn't supposed to go through personal belongings. But the box wasn't labeled, and it had been left there, forgotten. She gently opened it. Inside were photographs, old ones, family photos. Adrian, his wife, Ethan and Lily when they were younger, smiling, laughing, alive in a way that felt almost foreign compared to the house she now worked in. Grace picked up one of the photos. It showed Isabella sitting at the piano, Ethan beside her, his small fingers resting on the keys, while Lily sat on her lap, giggling. Grace's chest tightened. She understood now. The music, the silence, the distance. It wasn't just grief. It was loss of something irreplaceable. Grace carefully placed the photo back. But before she could close the box, she noticed something else. A folded piece of paper. She hesitated again, then slowly unfolded it. It was sheet music, the same lullaby. But this version had handwritten notes on it. Corrections, personal touches, a signature at the bottom. Isabella Cole. Grace stared at it for a long moment, then carefully folded it back and returned everything exactly as she found it. She closed the box and stepped away. But something inside her had shifted. That evening, as she moved through the kitchen, she found herself humming again, quietly, almost unconsciously. The melody lingered in her mind, and she didn't stop it this time, because now she understood what it meant. Ethan heard it. Of course he did. He always noticed things others didn't. He stood in the hallway, listening, his expression unreadable. But this time, he didn't walk away. He followed the sound, slowly, until he reached the kitchen doorway. Grace stopped the moment she saw him. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he stepped closer. "You found it, didn't you?" he asked. Grace frowned slightly. "Found what?" "The music," he said. "My mom's version." Grace's heart skipped. She hadn't expected him to know. "I didn't mean to go through anything private," she said. "I was cleaning and it's okay." The words surprised her. Ethan looked down for a moment. "Most people don't care enough to notice," he added quietly. Grace didn't know what to say, so she stayed silent. After a moment, Ethan spoke again. "Can you play it the way she used to?" The question hung in the air, heavy, fragile. Grace hesitated. Victoria's warning echoed again. "Limit your interaction." But Ethan's expression, it wasn't demanding. It wasn't entitled. It was something else. Hope. And something deeper. A test. Grace realized it then. He wasn't just asking. He was watching, waiting to see if she would turn away again, like everyone else, like she had the night before. She took a slow breath. "I can try," she said softly. Ethan nodded. They walked together to the music room. No words. Just quiet understanding. Grace sat at the piano once more. Her fingers rested on the keys. This time she didn't hesitate. She played. The melody flowed more naturally now, guided by the memory of the handwritten notes she had seen. Each note carried something deeper, something real. Ethan stood close, closer than before. Halfway through the song, Lily appeared again, drawn by the sound. She didn't ask permission, didn't hesitate. She simply walked over and sat beside Grace, leaning gently against her arm. Grace didn't stop playing, didn't pull away. Because in that moment, she made a choice, and not based on fear, not based on rules, but based on what she knew was right. When the song ended, the room fell silent again. But this silence felt different, full, warm, alive. Ethan looked at her. "You didn't play it wrong," he said. Grace smiled faintly. "I had a good teacher," she replied. Ethan frowned slightly. "You never met her?" Grace shook her head. "No," she said, "but I can hear her in the music." Lily tightened her grip on Grace's sleeve. "Don't stop singing anymore," she whispered. Grace felt her heart ache again. "I'll try," she said gently. From the hallway, Victoria watched once more, her expression darker than before, because now it was no longer a question. Grace wasn't just connecting with the children. She was becoming important to them, and that was something Victoria could not allow. She turned away sharply, pulling out her phone. There was only one solution left. She needed Adrian to see this, all of it, and not later. Now. As she dialed his number, a single thought crossed her mind. What would happen when Adrian Cole walked into that room and saw just how far this had gone? The rain started just before dusk. It came down in steady sheets against the tall glass windows of the Cole estate, blurring the world outside into a gray, distant haze. Inside, the house remained as immaculate as ever, quiet, controlled, untouched by the storm. But something was already shifting, something Adrian Cole had not yet seen. His car rolled through the iron gates without warning. No advance call, no message, no preparation. That was how he preferred it when he needed the truth. The driver stepped out first, opening the door, but Adrian was already moving. His expression was unreadable, his pace deliberate, his mind sharp with a quiet tension that had been building since Victoria's call earlier that afternoon. "She's getting too close," Victoria had said. Not emotional, not dramatic, just factual. That was what made it believable. Adrian trusted facts. He stepped inside the house, removing his coat slowly as the sound of rain followed him in. The staff froze briefly, surprised to see him so soon, but no one spoke unless spoken to. Victoria approached almost immediately. "You're back earlier than expected," she said, her tone calm but edged with something else. "I changed my schedule," Adrian replied. His eyes moved past her, scanning the house. Everything looked the same. Perfect. Controlled. So why did it feel different? "Where are the children?" he asked. "In the East Wing," Victoria answered. "They've been spending time there." Adrian didn't miss the slight pause. "With her?" he asked. Victoria didn't need to say the name. "Yes." A quiet silence passed between them. Then Adrian nodded once. "Show me." Victoria led the way down the long hallway, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Each step echoed with purpose, with certainty. She wasn't guessing anymore. She was proving. As they approached the East Wing, something unusual reached Adrian's ears. Music. Soft. Familiar. His steps slowed. His jaw tightened. He knew that melody. He hadn't heard it since. No, that wasn't possible. They reached the door, It was slightly open. Victoria stopped just short of it. "This is what I meant," she said quietly. Adrian didn't respond. He stepped forward and pushed the door open. What he saw made him freeze. Ethan was sitting on the floor, his back resting against the side of the piano, his eyes closed, completely still. Lily was beside him, curled into someone's side, her small hand gripping a piece of fabric as if letting go wasn't an option. And at the center of it all, Grace Mitchell, sitting at the piano, her fingers moving gently across the keys, her voice low and steady as she sang the lullaby Isabella used to play. The room felt alive, warm, peaceful. Everything Adrian's house had not been for months. And yet, his expression darkened, because something about this scene felt wrong. Not the music, not the calm, but the fact that it wasn't him who created it. The song ended. Grace's voice faded. Silence followed. Then Lily shifted slightly, tightening her hold on Grace's sleeve. "Don't stop," she murmured. Grace smiled softly. "I'll sing again later," she whispered. That was when Ethan opened his eyes and saw him. Everything changed in an instant. The calm in the room shattered. Ethan's body tensed. Lily turned, following his gaze, and when she saw her father standing there, her expression shifted from comfort to confusion. "Dad?" she said quietly. Grace turned. Her eyes met Adrian's, and for a brief moment, neither of them moved. The air grew heavy, charged. Adrian stepped fully into the room. His presence alone was enough to change everything. "What is going on here?" His voice was low, controlled, but there was something beneath it. Something sharp. Grace immediately stood up. Stand up." The command came cold and precise. She already was, but she straightened anyway. Ethan pushed himself to his feet as well. "You don't talk to her like that," he said suddenly. The words hung in the air. Unbelievable. Victoria's breath caught slightly behind Adrian, because that had never happened before. Not once. Adrian's eyes flickered toward his son. "What did you say?" Ethan didn't back down. "You heard me." The room fell completely silent. Grace stepped forward slightly. "It's not what it looks like," she said carefully. Adrian turned his attention back to her. "And what exactly does it look like?" he asked. Grace hesitated, because she knew the truth wouldn't sound any better. "I was just singing?" Adrian finished for her. His gaze shifted briefly to the piano, then back to her. "In my house," he added. The words were calm, but cutting. Lily stood up, moving closer to Grace instinctively. "She was helping us," she said softly. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Helping you with what?" Lily didn't answer, because she didn't know how to explain something that simple. Grace took a breath. "They were upset," she said. You were told to limit your interaction with my children." Victoria's voice entered the conversation now, smooth and controlled. Grace's shoulders stiffened. "I know," she said quietly. "Then why are we here?" The question wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be, because in that moment, everything was being judged. Every action, every choice, every boundary crossed. Ethan stepped forward. "She didn't do anything wrong," he said. Adrian's eyes snapped back to him. "Enough!" One word, sharp, final. Ethan clenched his fists, but didn't speak again. The tension in the room thickened. Grace stood still, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She needed to explain. But no explanation would fix this. Because this wasn't about rules anymore. It was about control. And she had stepped outside of it. Adrian took a slow step closer. "Look at me," he said. Grace lifted her eyes, and for the first time she saw something different in his expression. Not just anger, not just authority, but something deeper. Confusion, discomfort. Because part of him knew what he was seeing didn't fit the narrative he had been told, and that made it harder. "Do you understand where you are?" he asked. Grace nodded. "Yes." "And do you understand your role here?" Another pause, then, "Yes." The silence stretched, heavy, unforgiving. Adrian exhaled slowly, then said the words that changed everything. "If you don't, then you won't be here much longer." Lily gasped softly. Ethan's expression hardened completely. Grace felt something drop in her chest, but she didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't defend herself further. She simply nodded. "I understand." Adrian held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned away. "Victoria," he said. "Yes, sir." "Handle this." Grace's heart tightened, because she knew exactly what that meant. As Adrian walked out of the room, the storm outside seemed louder, heavier, more relentless. And inside that house, the fragile connection that had been quietly growing was now standing on the edge of collapse. But the real question was, had Adrian just made the biggest mistake of his life without even realizing it? The storm didn't let up that night. Rain continued to strike the windows in uneven rhythms, as if echoing the tension that now filled every corner of the Cole estate. The house that had briefly felt warm again was colder than ever. And this time, it wasn't because of silence. It was because something had been broken. After Adrian left the music room, Victoria didn't hesitate. "Grace, come with me," she said. Her tone was firm, final. Grace nodded once, her expression composed despite the weight pressing down on her chest. She glanced briefly at Ethan and Lily before following Victoria out of the room. Ethan stepped forward. "Where is she going?" he demanded. Victoria didn't stop walking. "That's not your concern," she replied. "It is," Ethan shot back. Lily clutched his arm, her small fingers trembling. "Don't let them take her," she whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't move, because deep down, he knew things had already gone too far. In the hallway, Grace walked beside Victoria in silence. They passed through the long corridors, past the polished mirrors and dim lights, until they reached the service wing at the back of the estate. Victoria stopped outside a small office. "Go in," she said. Grace stepped inside. The room was simple. A desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet. Nothing personal, nothing warm. Victoria closed the door behind them. "You've made this more difficult than it needed to be," she began. Grace remained standing. "I didn't mean to," she said quietly. "That's the problem," Victoria replied. "You didn't mean to, but you did." Grace lowered her eyes slightly. "I was just trying to help them." Victoria let out a sharp breath. "You're not here to help them. You're here to work. They needed someone. They have someone." The interruption came fast, cold. Grace looked up. "Do they?" she asked softly. The question hung in the air. For a brief moment, Victoria said nothing. Then her expression hardened. You're overstepping again. Grace pressed her lips together. I'm sorry. But the apology didn't carry the same weight anymore. Because it wasn't submission. It was honesty. Victoria walked to the desk and pulled out a document. Your employment here is conditional, she said. And right now, you're on the edge of losing it. Grace's fingers tightened slightly at her sides. I understand. Do you? Victoria asked. Because from what I've seen, you've ignored direct instructions. Grace took a slow breath. I didn't ignore them, she said. I just chose differently. Victoria's eyes narrowed. That's not your choice to make. Grace didn't argue, because she knew that was true, at least in this house. Pack your things, Victoria said finally. You'll be leaving tonight. The words landed harder than Grace expected, not because she didn't see it coming, but because part of her had hoped maybe things would be different. She nodded once. Okay. No protest, no tears, just quiet acceptance. Victoria watched her carefully, as if waiting for a reaction that never came. You're not going to argue? She asked. Grace shook her head. There's no point. Victoria studied her face again. Still no desperation. Still no manipulation. Just calm. It unsettled her more than anything else. Fine, she said. I'll have someone escort you out. Grace turned toward the door, but before she could leave, it opened suddenly. Ethan stood there. His eyes moved quickly between them. What are you doing? He asked. No one answered. Are you firing her? He pressed. Victoria stepped forward. This is not your decision. Ethan ignored her. He looked at Grace. Are you leaving? Grace hesitated. Just for a second. Then nodded. Yes. Lily appeared behind him, her face already pale. No, she whispered. Grace felt something twist sharply inside her chest. I'm sorry, she said gently. Lily shook her head, tears forming instantly. You can't go. Grace knelt slightly, keeping a careful distance. I have to. Why? The question was simple, but impossible to answer in a way that wouldn't hurt. Because sometimes, Grace said softly, things don't work the way we want them to. Lily's tears fell freely now. That's not fair. Grace's voice caught slightly. I know. Ethan stepped forward, his expression hard. You're just going to leave? Grace looked at him. I don't have a choice. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. You do, he said. You always did. The words hit deeper than anything Victoria had said, because they weren't about rules. They were about trust. Grace swallowed. I'm sorry, she repeated. Ethan shook his head. You're like the rest of them, he muttered. Grace froze. No, she said quickly. But you're still leaving, he replied. The truth of it left no room for argument. Silence filled the room again. Heavy. Final. Victoria stepped in. That's enough, she said. Both of you need to go back to your rooms. Ethan didn't move. Lily clung to Grace's sleeve. Please don't go, she whispered. Grace gently loosened her grip. I'll be okay, she said. And so will you. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure it was true. She stood up slowly. and without looking back again, she walked out of the room. The sound of her footsteps faded down the hallway, until there was nothing left. No music, no warmth, no connection, just silence. Ethan stood there for a long moment, then turned abruptly and walked away. Lily remained frozen in place, tears still falling. Victoria watched them both, her expression unreadable. But inside, something uneasy had begun to settle, because for the first time, she wasn't entirely sure she had done the right thing. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere beyond the gates of the estate, Grace Mitchell walked into the night alone. But the real question was, what would happen to the Cole family now, without the one person who had quietly held them together? The storm had passed by morning, but inside the Cole estate, nothing felt calm. The silence returned, thicker than before, pressing into every hallway, every room, every breath. Grace Mitchell was gone, and this time, the absence was impossible to ignore. Ethan didn't come down for breakfast. At first, no one noticed. It wasn't unusual for him to isolate himself. He had done it many times before. But as the minutes stretched into nearly an hour, Victoria Hayes felt a small flicker of unease. "Go check on him," she told one of the staff members. They returned a few minutes later, hesitant. "He's not in his room." Victoria's expression tightened. "Check the study." They did. Nothing. The game room? Empty. The backyard? No sign. By the time they reached the third empty location, the unease turned into something sharper, something real. Victoria walked upstairs herself, her steps faster now, more deliberate. She checked every room, every corner, every place Ethan had ever retreated to. Nothing. Downstairs, Lily sat at the edge of the staircase, her face pale, her fingers gripping the railing tightly. "Where's Ethan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria didn't answer immediately, because she didn't know, and that was a problem. Adrian Cole was in his office when the knock came. Sharp. Urgent. "Sir," Victoria said, as she stepped inside without waiting for permission. "Ethan is missing." The words cut through the room like glass. Adrian looked up slowly. "What do you mean, missing?" "He's not in the house," she replied. "We've checked everywhere." For a brief moment, Adrian didn't move. Then he stood. Fast. "Check the security cameras," he said, already walking past her. "They're being pulled up now." Within minutes, they stood in front of the surveillance monitor in the control room. The footage rolled. Hallways, staircases, doors, and then, there, Ethan. Late the previous night, walking alone down the back corridor. No shoes, no jacket, just a thin shirt and determination in every step. He pushed open the service door and stepped out into the rain. The screen froze. The room fell silent. Adrian's face went still, dangerously still. "Why wasn't this caught?" he asked. Victoria's throat tightened. "The night staff didn't report. That's not what I asked." His voice dropped, cold, controlled. "Why wasn't this caught?" No one answered, because there was no excuse that would matter. Adrian turned sharply. "Get the cars ready," he said. "Call security. I want every exit road checked." "Yes, sir." The house erupted into motion. Staff rushed. Phones rang. Orders were given. But none of it changed one simple fact. Ethan was out there, alone, and no one knew where he had gone. Lily stood at the base of the stairs, watching everything unfold with wide, terrified eyes. She didn't cry. Not this time. She just looked at Adrian. "You made her leave," she said quietly. The words stopped him. He turned to her slowly. "And now he's gone." There was no accusation in her voice, no anger, just truth. And somehow, that was worse. Adrian didn't respond. Because he couldn't. Not yet. Because part of him already knew. This wasn't random. This wasn't just a child wandering off. This was a reaction to something he had done. Outside, the roads were still wet from the storm. Puddles reflected the gray morning sky as Adrian's car sped through the gates, followed closely by two others. His hands were clenched tightly in his lap, his mind racing. Where would Ethan go? He didn't have friends nearby. He didn't trust strangers. There were only a few places that meant anything to him. Then it hit him. The greenhouse, at the far edge of the property. Old, unused. A place Isabella used to spend time in when the children were younger. "Turn around," Adrian said suddenly. The driver reacted instantly, swerving onto a side path that led toward the back of the estate. They drove faster now, tires crunching over gravel. The greenhouse came into view, its glass panels fogged from the inside, the door slightly open. Adrian didn't wait for the car to fully stop. He stepped out and moved quickly, his heart pounding harder with every step. He pushed the door open. And there, in the corner, Ethan sat curled up on the ground, his arms wrapped tightly around himself, clutching something. Adrian stepped closer, slowly. "Ethan." No response. "Ethan, look at me." The boy didn't move. Adrian crouched down slightly, and then he saw it. The object in Ethan's hands, a small wooden box. Adrian's chest tightened. He knew that box. It held the last things Isabella had left behind. The photos, the music, the memories. "Where did you get that?" Adrian asked quietly. Ethan's voice came out hoarse. "I thought you threw it away." The words hit harder than anything else. "I didn't," Adrian said. "You threw everything else away," Ethan replied. Adrian froze, because he didn't know how to argue with that. Ethan looked up then, his eyes red, not from crying, but from holding it in. "She didn't," he said. Adrian frowned. "Who?" "Grace," Ethan answered. "She fixed it." He held up the box slightly. "She cared." The silence between them stretched, heavy, unforgiving. "And you made her leave." Adrian swallowed. For the first time, the weight of that decision settled fully on him. Not as control, not as authority, but as a mistake, a real one. Behind him, Victoria stood at the entrance, watching, listening, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face, because this wasn't going the way she expected. Ethan's voice dropped. She was the only one who didn't leave. Adrian closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them again. Because now, he understood something he hadn't before. This wasn't about rules, or boundaries, or control. This was about trust, and he had broken it. The question was, could he fix it before it was too late? The greenhouse felt warmer than the rest of the estate, not because of the temperature, but because something honest had finally been spoken inside it. Adrian Cole stood there, looking at his son, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't have an answer. He had built companies from nothing, negotiated deals worth billions, outmaneuvered rivals without hesitation. But this quiet accusation from an 8-year-old boy, he didn't know how to fix it. Ethan didn't look away. He held the wooden box tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. "You said everything would be okay," Ethan said quietly. Adrian's chest tightened. "I know. But it's not." There was no anger in his voice, no raised tone, just truth, the kind that couldn't be ignored. Adrian took a slow breath. "I thought I was doing what was best," he said. Ethan shook his head slightly. "You always think that." The words landed harder than anything else, because they were right. Adrian had always believed control meant protection. That structure meant safety. That distance meant strength. But standing there, in that quiet greenhouse, he began to see it differently. Control had cost him connection. Behind them, Victoria remained silent, but her mind was racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. Adrian wasn't supposed to question himself. Not like this. Not because of a maid. And yet, here he was. Ethan finally looked down at the box again. "She didn't even take anything," he said. "She fixed it and put it back." Adrian frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan opened the box slowly. Inside were the photographs, the sheet music, everything exactly as it had been. But one thing was different. The music. It had been repaired. The torn edges carefully taped. The handwritten notes preserved. Adrian stared at it. He hadn't touched that box in months, maybe longer. He couldn't. Every time he looked at it, it reminded him of everything he had lost. So he had done what he always did. Closed it, locked it away, moved forward. But Grace, she had opened it, not to take, not to use, but to understand. And somehow, she had done what he couldn't. She had preserved something he had been too afraid to face. Adrian exhaled slowly, and for the first time, something shifted inside him. Not control, not authority, something else, awareness. "I didn't know," he said quietly. Ethan looked up. "You didn't ask." The words were simple, but they carried weight, because that was the truth. Adrian had never asked. Not his children, not Grace, not anyone. He had assumed, decided, controlled. And now, he was seeing the result of that. Silence fell again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full of realization. Victoria stepped forward slightly. "Sir," she said carefully, "we should bring Ethan back inside. He's been out here too long." Adrian didn't respond immediately. His eyes were still on the music, on the careful way it had been handled, on the quiet evidence of someone else's care. Then he stood. "Get the car ready," he said. Victoria blinked. "For what?" Adrian turned to her. "To find her." The words caught her off guard. "Sir, with respect—" "No," Adrian interrupted. His voice wasn't loud, but it was firm, decided. "This ends now." Victoria's expression tightened. "You're making a decision based on emotion," she said. Adrian held her gaze. "For the first time," he replied, "I think that's exactly what I should be doing." The shift was subtle, but undeniable. Because this wasn't the same man who had walked into the house the night before. This man was questioning himself. Victoria stepped back slightly, not agreeing, but not pushing further. Because something had changed, and she couldn't control it. Ethan watched the exchange carefully. "You're going to bring her back?" he asked. Adrian looked at him. "I'm going to try." Ethan didn't respond right away, because for the first time, he wasn't sure if he believed him. Not completely. But there was something in Adrian's voice, something different, something real, and that was enough, for now. Back at the house, Lily sat by the front window, her small hands pressed against the glass. Waiting. She didn't know for what. She just knew something was missing, and she wanted it back. The sound of cars pulling up broke the silence. She turned quickly, hope flickering in her eyes. But it wasn't Grace. It was Adrian. Ethan. And the weight of something unresolved. Adrian stepped inside, his expression focused. "Find out where she went," he said to the staff. "Check her file, her last address, anyone she listed as a reference." "Yes, sir." The house moved again, but this time, it felt different. Less controlled, more urgent, more human. Upstairs, Victoria stood alone for a moment, thinking, replaying everything. She had believed she was protecting the structure of the house, maintaining order, doing what was necessary. But now, she wasn't so sure. Because for the first time, Adrian wasn't following her lead. He was going against it. And that changed everything. Meanwhile, across the city, in a small apartment far from marble floors and quiet halls, Grace Mitchell sat beside her mother's bed, holding her hand, watching the rise and fall of her breathing. The room was simple, worn, but filled with something the mansion had lacked: warmth. Grace looked down at her mother, then at the small stack of unpaid bills on the table, then at her phone. Silent. No missed calls. No messages. She didn't expect any, because in her mind, that chapter was over. She had done what she could, given what she had, and now she had to move on. But the real question was, would Adrian Cole find her in time before she disappeared from his life and his children's lives completely? By late afternoon, the Cole estate no longer felt like a place of order. It felt like a place searching for something it had already lost. Adrian stood in his office, the city skyline stretching beyond the glass, but he wasn't looking at it. His attention was fixed on a single file resting on his desk. Grace Mitchell. Address. Employment history. References. Everything reduced to paper, controlled, defined. But none of it explained what he had seen. None of it explained why his children had trusted her in ways they hadn't trusted anyone else. "Sir," one of the staff members said from the doorway, "we found her last listed address." Adrian didn't hesitate. "Send it to my driver." "Yes, sir." The staff member paused. "There's something else." Adrian looked up. "She hasn't worked anywhere else in the last year," the staff member added. "Before this, she left a music program, full scholarship." Adrian's expression shifted slightly. Why did she leave? "No record of misconduct," the staff member said. "Just withdrew." Adrian nodded once. "Thank you." When the door closed, silence returned. But this time it carried something different. questions, unanswered ones. Adrian picked up the file again, flipping through the pages more slowly. Grace Mitchell, age 28, former music student, now a maid. It didn't fit, not completely, and that bothered him, because Adrian didn't like things that didn't fit. He stood, grabbed his coat, and headed out without another word. Across the house, Lily watched him leave from the staircase. "Where is he going?" she asked quietly. Ethan stood beside her, his expression unreadable. "To find her," he said. Lily looked at him. "Do you think he will?" Ethan didn't answer right away, because part of him still wasn't sure. But another part, a smaller, quieter part, wanted to believe. "I don't know," he said finally. The car ride was silent. Adrian didn't make calls, didn't check emails, didn't distract himself. He just sat there, thinking, replaying everything. The music, the way Ethan had looked at her, the way Lily had held on to her, and the way Grace had stood there, calm, even when she was being dismissed. No anger, no desperation, just quiet acceptance. That wasn't manipulation. That wasn't strategy. That was something else. Something real. "Sir, we're here," the driver said. Adrian looked up. The building in front of him was nothing like his estate. Old, faded, worn down by time, paint peeling from the walls, windows cracked at the edges. This was where she lived. For a moment, Adrian didn't move, because stepping out of the car meant stepping into a world he rarely acknowledged, a world far from control, far from certainty. Then he opened the door and stepped out. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of dust and age. The lights flickered overhead. Adrian walked slowly, following the apartment numbers until he reached the one listed in the file. 3B. He raised his hand to knock, then paused, because for the first time, he didn't know what he was walking into or what he would say. Still, he knocked. Once, then again. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened, and there she was, Grace Mitchell. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke, because neither of them expected this. "You found me," Grace said quietly. Adrian nodded. "Yes." She stepped aside slightly. "Come in." The apartment was small, simple, but clean. A single couch, a narrow kitchen, and in the corner, a bed, where an older woman lay, resting. Grace's mother. Adrian's eyes moved around the room, taking everything in. The worn furniture, the stacked bills, the quiet effort it took just to maintain this space, this life. Grace closed the door behind him. "You didn't have to come," she said. Adrian turned to her. "Yes, I did." Grace studied his face carefully, trying to understand what had brought him here. "Why?" she asked. Adrian hesitated, because the truth wasn't something he said often. "Because I made a mistake," he said finally. Grace didn't respond right away. She had expected many things: accusations, questions, even silence, but not that. "I didn't listen," Adrian continued. "I didn't ask. I made a decision based on what I thought I knew." Grace crossed her arms slightly. "You had reasons," she said. "I had assumptions." The correction was immediate, clear. Grace looked at him for a long moment, then glanced toward her mother. "She needs rest," she said softly. Adrian nodded. "I won't stay long." Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable, just uncertain. "I didn't take anything," Grace said suddenly. "From your house?" "I know." She looked at him, surprised. "I saw what you did," Adrian added, "with the music." Grace's expression softened slightly. "It mattered to them," she said. "It should have mattered to me," Adrian replied. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard, because it wasn't defensive. It wasn't controlled. It was real. "I'm not asking you to come back because of my children," he said. Grace frowned slightly. "Then why?" Adrian met her eyes. "Because you were right," he said. The words hung in the air. Heavy, unexpected. Grace's breath caught slightly. About what? Adrian took a step closer. "They don't just need structure," he said. "They need someone who sees them." Grace looked away, because that was the part that hurt the most. "I saw them," she said quietly. "But that doesn't mean I belong there." Adrian didn't respond immediately, because that was the truth he couldn't argue with. Instead, he said something else. "Come back," he said. Grace shook her head slightly. "It's not that simple." "I know. Your house, your rules, and they were wrong." The interruption was soft, but firm. Grace looked at him again, searching. Because this version of Adrian Cole was not the one she had left behind. "You can't just change everything overnight," she said. "No," Adrian agreed, "but I can start." The room fell silent again. But this time, it felt like something was shifting. Not completely. Not yet. But enough to matter. Grace exhaled slowly. "I need time," she said. Adrian nodded. "Then take it." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Just don't disappear," he added. Grace didn't answer, because she didn't know if she could promise that. Adrian left the apartment without another word, and as the door closed behind him, Grace stood there, her thoughts racing, because everything had just changed again. But the real question was, would she trust him enough to walk back into the world that had already pushed her out once? The night after Adrian left Grace's apartment, the city felt unusually quiet. Not because the noise had disappeared, but because something inside him had finally settled enough for him to hear himself think. For years, Adrian Cole had relied on instinct sharpened by experience. He made decisions quickly, confidently, without hesitation. But now, he was questioning everything. Back at the estate, the house remained still, too still. Ethan sat in the music room, his fingers resting lightly on the piano keys, not playing, just feeling the silence between the notes. Lily lay curled up on the couch, her eyes half open, watching him without speaking. Neither of them had asked where Adrian had gone, but both of them knew hope didn't come easily to them anymore. Not after everything. Victoria Hayes stood just outside the doorway, observing the scene with a growing sense of unease. She had expected order to return. She had expected the house to fall back into its usual rhythm after Grace left. But instead, everything felt worse, more fragile, more unstable. And for the first time, she began to realize something she had refused to admit before. Grace hadn't disrupted the house. She had held it together. Victoria turned away, her thoughts tightening as she walked down the hallway. She had always believed she was doing the right thing, maintaining discipline, protecting structure, preserving boundaries. But now, those same boundaries felt like walls, and those walls were closing in. Meanwhile, across the city, Grace sat beside her mother's bed, staring at the faint glow of the bedside lamp. Her mother slept quietly, her breathing shallow but steady. Grace held her hand gently, her thumb brushing across the worn skin. "You should go back," her mother said suddenly, her voice weak but clear. Grace looked up, startled. "I thought you were asleep." "I was," her mother replied softly. "But I know that look on your face." Grace hesitated. "I'm fine." Her mother smiled faintly. "You've never been good at lying to me." Silence settled between them. Then, "He came here, didn't he?" her mother asked. Grace nodded. "Yes." "And?" Grace looked down. "He said he made a mistake." Her mother's eyes softened. "And do you believe him?" Grace didn't answer right away, because belief wasn't simple. "I don't know," she admitted. Her mother squeezed her hand lightly. "Sometimes people don't realize what they have until they lose it." Grace exhaled slowly. "That doesn't mean they won't lose it again." The truth in her words lingered, heavy, real. Her mother didn't argue, because she understood. Trust, once broken, didn't come back easily. "You have to decide what you're willing to risk," she said gently. Grace nodded, but the decision didn't feel clear. Not yet. Back at the estate, Adrian stood alone in his office. The lights were dim. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. But he wasn't looking at it. He was watching something else. Security footage from days before. The music room. The hallway. Moments he had missed. Moments he had ignored. On the screen, Grace moved quietly through the house. Cleaning. Working. Existing. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious, but then, another clip. The night Lily had cried on the couch. Grace sitting at a distance. Not touching. Not forcing. Just humming. Waiting. And slowly, Lily moving closer. Trust. Not taken. Given. Adrian leaned back slightly, his jaw tightening. He played another clip. Ethan standing in the doorway, watching, testing. And Grace, doing nothing to impress him, nothing to win him over. Just being consistent. Present. Real. Adrian paused the footage. Because now, he saw it clearly. Everything Victoria had said had been incomplete, not entirely false, but not entirely true. And that difference had cost him more than he realized. A quiet knock came at the door. "Come in," Adrian said. Victoria stepped inside, her posture straight, controlled. But something in her eyes had changed. "I reviewed the staff reports," she said, "and the footage." Adrian didn't respond immediately. "Go on?" Victoria hesitated. Then, "I misjudged her." The admission was quiet, but it carried weight. Adrian looked at her. "Why?" Victoria took a breath. "I thought she was crossing boundaries," she said. I thought she was creating dependency. And now? Victoria's gaze lowered slightly. I think she was giving them something they didn't have. Adrian nodded once. Yes. The agreement came without hesitation, and that alone said enough. Victoria's expression tightened. Sir, I was trying to protect the household. I know, but I may have caused more damage than I prevented. Adrian studied her for a moment, then spoke calmly. We both did. The words settled between them, not as blame, but as acknowledgement. Victoria exhaled slowly. Will you bring her back? She asked. Adrian turned his gaze back to the window. I asked her to return. And? She needs time. Victoria nodded. That made sense after everything. It would. Silence filled the room again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was reflective. Because something had changed. Not just in Adrian, but in the entire house. Downstairs, Lily finally drifted off to sleep. But even in her dreams, her hand rested near the edge of the couch, as if reaching for someone who wasn't there. Ethan remained in the music room, his fingers finally pressing the keys again. Soft, uncertain, but trying. Trying to hold on to something that mattered, something that could still be lost. And somewhere across the city, Grace stared at her phone, the screen blank, her reflection staring back at her. Because now, the choice was hers. Stay away, protect herself, or go back, and risk everything again. But the real question was she ready to trust a man who had already let her walk away once? Morning arrived slowly, not with light, but with decision. Grace Mitchell sat at the small kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in her hands. The city outside her window had already begun its usual rhythm. Cars passing, people moving, life continuing. But inside her apartment, everything felt paused. Her phone rested in front of her, silent, still, waiting. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same images. Lily's hand gripping her sleeve, Ethan's expression when he said, "You're like the rest of them," and Adrian's voice, "I made a mistake." Grace exhaled slowly, because those words had stayed with her, not because they fixed anything, but because they were real. Her mother stirred in the next room. "Have you decided?" she asked softly. Grace looked down at her hands. "No." Her mother stepped into the doorway, leaning slightly against the frame. "You don't have to go back," she said. "Not if it hurts you." Grace nodded. "I know. But you're thinking about it." Grace didn't deny it. Because she was. Not for Adrian, not even for the job, but for the children. For the way Lily had smiled for the first time. For the way Ethan had finally spoken without shutting down. For the way the house had felt alive. "I don't trust him," Grace admitted quietly. Her mother didn't look surprised. "Trust isn't something you're given," she said. "It's something you build." Grace glanced at her. "And what if it breaks again?" Her mother gave a small, knowing smile. "Then at least you'll know you tried for the right reasons." The words settled deep. Not easy, but honest. Grace looked at her phone again, then slowly picked it up. She didn't call. She didn't text. She just held it. Because even that felt like a step. Across the city, Adrian Cole stood in the driveway of his estate, staring at something he hadn't noticed in years. The greenhouse, the place where he had found Ethan, the place where something had shifted. He walked toward it slowly, each step deliberate. Inside, the air was still. The wooden box remained where Ethan had left it the night before. Adrian picked it up, opened it, looked at the music, the careful repairs, the attention to detail. Grace hadn't needed to do that. No one had asked her to. She had simply chosen to. Adrian closed the box gently, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel something he had avoided, regret, not as a weakness, but as a realization. He had been so focused on protecting his children from pain that he had forgotten how to help them heal. Back inside the house, Lily sat quietly at the dining table, her spoon resting in her bowl. She hadn't eaten. Again. Ethan sat across from her, watching. "She's not coming back, is she?" Lily asked softly. Ethan didn't answer right away, because he didn't want to lie. "I don't know," he said finally. Lily's eyes filled slightly. "I want her to," she whispered. Ethan looked down. "Me too." The silence that followed was different this time. Not empty, but waiting. Waiting for something that might not happen. And that uncertainty was harder than anything else. At that exact moment, a phone buzzed. Grace looked at the screen. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" There was a brief pause, then, "It's Adrian." His voice was steady, calm, but different. Grace didn't respond immediately, because hearing him again changed something. "I'm not calling to pressure you," he continued. "I just wanted to say something I didn't say before." Grace leaned back slightly, listening. "I was wrong," Adrian said. No hesitation, no explanation. Just truth. Grace closed her eyes for a moment. Because those words were harder to ignore than anything else. "I know," she said quietly. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, just acknowledgement. Adrian exhaled slowly. "They miss you," he added. Grace's grip tightened on the phone. "I know," she whispered, "and I do too." That part she didn't expect. She opened her eyes. "Why?" she asked. Adrian didn't answer immediately, because he needed to say it right. "Because you saw things I didn't," he said, "and you did something I couldn't." Grace swallowed. "That doesn't mean I belong there." "No," Adrian agreed. "It doesn't." The honesty caught her off guard again. "But it means I need to change," he added. Silence. Then, "I'm not asking you to come back as a maid," Adrian said. Grace frowned slightly. "Then what are you asking?" Adrian took a breath. "I'm asking you to come back as someone my children can trust." The words landed differently. Not as an order, not as a role, but as recognition. Grace didn't answer, because she wasn't ready to say yes, but she wasn't ready to say no either. "I'll give you time," Adrian said, "as much as you need." Grace nodded slowly. "Okay." The call ended, and for a moment, everything felt still again. But something had changed. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Grace stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Because now, the decision wasn't about fear anymore. It was about choice. Back at the estate, Adrian stood in the music room, alone, waiting, not controlling, not deciding, just waiting. And for the first time in his life, he understood that some things couldn't be forced. They had to be earned. The question was, would Grace Mitchell choose to come back? Or would this be the moment their paths separated for good? The house didn't change overnight. Not the walls, not the furniture, not the routines written into every corner of the Cole estate. But something inside it began to shift, subtly, quietly, without announcement. Adrian Cole started with the simplest thing. He stayed. That morning, instead of leaving for a meeting before sunrise, he remained at the breakfast table, waiting. Not for reports, not for calls, but for his children. Ethan came down first. He stopped when he saw his father already seated. It was unusual, unexpected. Adrian didn't speak right away. He simply looked at him. "Good morning," he said finally. The words sounded unfamiliar. Ethan hesitated, then nodded once. "Morning." He sat down, slowly, cautiously. Lily came next. Her small steps paused at the doorway. She looked between them, uncertain. Adrian turned slightly. "Come sit," he said gently. Not an order, an invitation. Lily walked over and climbed into her chair. No one spoke for a moment, because none of them quite knew how. Then Adrian did something else, something small, but different. "What do you want for breakfast?" he asked. Lily blinked. "You mean I can choose?" Adrian nodded. "Yes." She looked at Ethan, then back at Adrian. "Pancakes," she said softly. Adrian gave a small nod to the kitchen staff. Pancakes. The word carried more weight than it should have, because it wasn't about the food. It was about being heard. Ethan watched everything carefully, analyzing, testing, waiting to see if this was real, or just another version of control. Adrian noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything now, or at least, he was trying to. Later that day, Adrian canceled 3 meetings, rescheduled 2, ignored 1 entirely. It didn't make sense to anyone else, but to him, it was necessary. He walked through the house differently, slower, more aware. He noticed the empty spaces where Grace used to be. The kitchen felt quieter, the hallway colder, the music room incomplete. And that absence, it mattered. Victoria Hayes watched it all unfold from a distance. She didn't interfere, didn't correct, didn't enforce the structure she had once held so tightly, because something in her had shifted too. She had spent years believing that order meant stability, that discipline meant safety. But now, she saw what she had missed: emotion, connection, the things that couldn't be controlled, only supported. That evening, Adrian found himself standing outside the music room again. The door slightly open, the piano untouched. For a moment he didn't go in, because this room still felt like something he didn't fully understand. Then he stepped inside. Ethan was already there, sitting at the piano, his fingers resting on the keys, not playing, just thinking. Adrian walked in slowly. "Can you show me?" he asked. Ethan didn't turn. "Show you what?" Adrian took a breath. "The song." Ethan's hands stilled. "You don't know it." "I want to." The honesty in Adrian's voice made Ethan pause. He turned slightly, studying him, trying to decide if this was real. Then, slowly, he pressed a key. One note, then another, unsteady, but trying. Adrian stood beside him, listening, not correcting, not controlling, just present. For the first time. Downstairs, Lily sat by the window again. But this time, she wasn't just waiting. She was hoping. Because something felt different. Something felt like it might come back. Across the city, Grace Mitchell sat at the same kitchen table, but she wasn't holding her phone anymore. It rested beside her. Still, quiet, but no longer ignored. Her mother sat across from her, watching. "You've been thinking all day," she said. Grace nodded. "Yes." "And?" Grace looked down. "I don't know if I can go back." Her mother didn't push. "Why?" Grace took a breath. "Because I don't want to be in a place where I don't belong." The truth of it lingered. Clear, honest. Her mother leaned forward slightly. "And what if you do belong?" she asked. Grace looked up. "That house, that family?" She hesitated. "They don't need someone like me." Her mother smiled gently. "They already showed you that they do." Grace didn't respond, because that was the part she couldn't ignore. Ethan's trust, Lily's attachment, even Adrian's change. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't guaranteed. But it was real. Grace stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked out at the city, and for the first time since she left, she didn't feel like she was running away. She felt like she was choosing. Back at the estate, Adrian stood alone again in the music room. The house was quiet, but not empty. Not anymore. Because something had begun to rebuild itself, piece by piece, moment by moment. He looked at the piano, then at the doorway, as if expecting someone to appear. But no one did. Not yet. And that was okay. Because now, he understood something he hadn't before. Change didn't happen instantly. Trust didn't return overnight. And some things had to be earned slowly. The question was, would Grace Mitchell take that first step back? Or would the distance between them grow into something that could never be closed again? The call came 2 days later. Not from Adrian, not from the house, but from somewhere Grace hadn't expected. "Grace Mitchell?" a woman's voice asked over the phone. "Yes, this is she." "Hi, my name is Rebecca Lawson. I'm calling from the Midtown Arts Center." Grace frowned slightly, glancing at her mother across the room. "I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong number." "I don't think so," Rebecca replied gently. "Your name was submitted for a vocal re-entry program. Adult applicants returning to music after an interruption in their studies." Grace's heart skipped. "I didn't apply." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Well, your profile is here. Former scholarship student. Strong performance record. We're holding private auditions this week. I wanted to see if you were still interested." Grace didn't speak. because she knew exactly how this had happened. Adrian. You don't have to decide now, Rebecca added. But opportunities like this don't come around often. Grace swallowed. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. The call ended, and the room fell silent. Her mother watched her carefully. That wasn't a coincidence, was it? She asked. Grace shook her head slowly. No. Her mother smiled faintly. He's trying. Grace let out a quiet breath. Yes, but that doesn't mean you have to accept it. I know. Grace looked down at her hands. Because this wasn't about a job anymore, or even about Adrian. It was about something she had buried a long time ago. Her voice, her dream, the part of her she had given up to survive. I'm scared, she admitted softly. Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. Of failing? Grace shook her head. Of wanting it again. The honesty in her words filled the room, because wanting something meant risking it, losing it, feeling it slip away. And she had already lost so much. You deserve to want it, her mother said gently. Grace closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. That same afternoon, she stood outside the Midtown Arts Center. The building was modest but elegant, filled with quiet energy. People moved in and out, carrying sheet music, instruments, voices warming up in distant rooms. Grace hesitated at the entrance, her heart racing, her hands slightly trembling, because stepping inside meant facing something she had avoided for years. Then she took a breath and walked in. Inside, the audition room was simple. A piano, a panel of 3 judges, Rebecca Lawson among them. Grace Mitchell? Rebecca said with a warm smile. Yes. Take your time, whenever you're ready. Grace nodded. She walked to the center of the room, closed her eyes, and for a moment, she was back in the Cole estate, in the music room, with Ethan listening, with Lily leaning close, with a house that had briefly felt alive. She opened her eyes and began to sing. The same lullaby, but this time, it wasn't just for them. It was for herself. Her voice started soft, uncertain, then grew, stronger, clearer, carrying everything she had been holding inside. Loss, fear, hope, and something new, courage. When she finished, the room was silent, not empty, but full. Rebecca smiled. That was beautiful. Grace exhaled slowly, her chest rising and falling. Thank you. Across the city, Adrian stood in the living room with Ethan and Lily. They were quieter than usual, but not withdrawn, not closed off, just waiting. Where do you think she is? Lily asked softly. Adrian looked at her. I think she's figuring something out, he said. Lily frowned slightly. Will she come back? Adrian didn't answer immediately, because he didn't want to promise something he couldn't control. I hope so, he said finally. Ethan watched him carefully. You're not going to make her? He asked. Adrian shook his head. No. Ethan nodded slowly, because that answer meant something. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Grace stood outside the Arts Center again. This time, she felt different, not certain, not secure, but lighter. like something inside her had been given a chance to breathe again. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She opened it. No pressure. No expectations. Just, thank you for what you gave them. Adrian Grace stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed a response. She paused, deleted it, then typed again. I'm not ready to come back yet. She hesitated, then added, but I'm not walking away either. She hit send. Across the city, Adrian's phone lit up. He read the message once, then again, and for the first time in days, he smiled. Not because everything was fixed, but because something had begun. Something real. Something earned. Upstairs, Ethan sat at the piano again. This time, he played more confidently. Lily sat beside him, humming softly. The melody filled the house once more. Not perfect, not complete, but present. And that was enough. Because sometimes, the most important changes weren't loud. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't demand attention. They simply grew. Quietly. Until one day, they became undeniable. The question now was, when Grace Mitchell finally walked back through those doors, would everything she had started be strong enough to last? The invitation arrived a week later, not in an envelope, not through a formal call, but through something simpler, a message. We'd love for you to visit. No expectations, just dinner. Adrian Grace read it twice, then set her phone down. Because this time, it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like a choice. Across the room, her mother watched her quietly. You're going, she said. It wasn't a question. Grace smiled faintly. I think I am. Not as a maid, not as someone trying to fit into a place that didn't want her, but as herself. That evening, the Cole estate looked the same as it always had. Lights glowing softly. The driveway perfectly maintained. The doors open before she even reached them. But the moment Grace stepped inside, she felt it. The difference. It wasn't in the walls or the furniture. It was in the people. Lily was the first to see her. She froze for half a second, then ran. Grace! Her small arms wrapped tightly around her waist, holding on as if letting go wasn't an option. Grace knelt down, hugging her back gently. Hi, she said softly. Lily pulled away just enough to look at her. You came back, Grace smiled. For dinner. Lily nodded quickly. That's enough. Behind her, Ethan stood in the hallway, not running, not rushing, just watching. Grace stood up slowly. Their eyes met. Hi, she said. Ethan hesitated, then stepped forward. Hi. He didn't hug her, but he didn't keep his distance either. And that was progress. Adrian appeared a moment later. He didn't rush, didn't interrupt. He simply walked toward them and stopped. Thank you for coming, he said. Grace nodded. Thank you for inviting me. The words were simple, but they carried something new. Respect, not obligation, not hierarchy. Just recognition. Dinner that night was different, not formal, not silent. There were pauses, awkward moments, but also laughter, small at first, then real. Lily talked more than she had in weeks. Ethan listened, sometimes added a word or two. Adrian didn't control the conversation, didn't direct it. He followed it, and that changed everything. At one point, Lily looked at Grace. "Will you sing after dinner?" she asked. Grace glanced at Adrian, not asking permission, just acknowledging him. Adrian nodded. "If she wants to." Grace smiled softly. "I do." They moved to the music room, the same room where everything had started. But it didn't feel the same. It felt different. Not tense, not fragile, just open. Grace sat at the piano. Ethan stood beside her. Lily curled up on the floor. Adrian remained near the doorway, watching, listening, learning. Grace began to play. The melody filled the room once more. Soft, familiar. But now, it carried something new. Not just memory, but healing. Ethan closed his eyes, not to escape, but to feel. Lily leaned closer, not out of fear, but comfort. And Adrian, for the first time, didn't feel like an outsider in his own home. When the song ended, silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It was complete. Ethan opened his eyes. "You're not leaving again, right?" he asked. The question wasn't demanding, just honest. Grace looked at him, then at Lily, then at Adrian. "I'm not staying the way I was before," she said gently. Ethan frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Grace smiled. "It means I'm not here as someone you have to rely on," she said. "I'm here as someone you can trust." The distinction mattered, more than they realized. Lily nodded. "That's okay." Ethan considered it, then gave a small nod. "Okay." Adrian stepped forward slightly. "I meant what I said," he told Grace. "Things are going to be different." Grace met his gaze. "I know. And I don't expect you to believe it right away." "I don't," she replied. A brief silence passed. Then Adrian nodded. "Fair." Because this time, he wasn't trying to convince her. He was willing to prove it. Weeks passed. Not dramatically, not perfectly, but steadily. Grace returned, not as a maid, but as someone present in the children's lives. She balanced her time between the estate and the arts center. Her voice grew stronger. Her confidence returned. Ethan began speaking more, not just to her, but to his father. Lily laughed again, freely, without hesitation, and Adrian, he changed. Not all at once, but in the ways that mattered. He listened. He stayed. He showed up. The house didn't become perfect, but it became real. And that was enough. One evening, during a small charity event hosted at the estate, Adrian stood before a room full of people. Investors, partners, guests who had known him as a man of control and precision. He didn't speak about business or success. Instead, he said something unexpected. "Sometimes," he began, "the most valuable thing in your life isn't something you build, but something you almost lose." The room fell silent. "Don't wait until that moment," he added, "to realize what truly matters." Grace stood at the back of the room, listening, not as an employee, not as an outsider, but as someone who had changed that truth and been changed by it. Because in the end, It wasn't about wealth, or status, or control. It was about something simpler, something quieter, something far more powerful: connection, and the courage to recognize it. Even when it comes from the last place you expect, sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who heal what we cannot fix. Kindness doesn't come from status, it comes from the heart. Never judge someone by their role, their clothes, or their position. The quietest souls often carry the deepest strength, and the purest intentions can change lives forever. If this story touched you, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe for more meaningful stories like this.